The gunshots that changed everything. But what if they never happened? What if JFK's motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza without incident, and he lived to finish not just his first term, but potentially a second? The America you know today might not exist. Vietnam, the moon landing, even the music you grew up with, all of it could have been radically different. Let's rewrite history. Welcome back to What If Remix, where we dig into the turning points that shaped our world and ask the question, what if things went differently? Today, we're tackling one of the biggest what-ifs in American history. John F. Kennedy was 46 years old when he died. Younger than many of you watching right now were when you started your careers. He had decades of potential leadership ahead of him. So buckle up, because the world we're about to explore might shock you more than you expect. Let's start with the big one, Vietnam. In our timeline, JFK had already sent about 16,000 advisors to Vietnam by 1963, but he hadn't committed to a full-scale war. Just days before Dallas, he'd approved plans to withdraw 1,000 troops by the end of that year. His defense secretary, Robert McNamara, later claimed JFK was planning to pull out of Vietnam entirely after the 1964 election. But Lyndon Johnson, he went all in. By 1968, over 500,000 American troops were in Vietnam. 58,000 Americans died. The war cost over $140 billion and tore the country apart. Here's the controversial truth. If Kennedy lives, there's a strong chance that war never happens, at least not the way we remember it. Kennedy was a Navy veteran who'd seen combat. He'd already been burned by the Bay of Pigs disaster in Cuba, and he was becoming increasingly skeptical of his military advisors pushing for escalation. Without Vietnam spiraling into a decade-long nightmare, think about what changes. 58,000 young men come home. Families stay intact. The protests, the riots, the generational divide that defined the late 60s and early 70s, maybe that doesn't happen, or at least not to the same degree. The entire baby boomer experience transforms overnight. And here's the kicker. Without Vietnam draining the treasury, Kennedy's domestic programs get funded. By 1963, JFK had finally committed to civil rights, proposing what would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But he was murdered before he could see it through. Johnson pushed it across the finish line and added the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Give LBJ credit, he got it done. But here's what most people forget. Johnson's Great Society programs got gutted because of Vietnam. The war ate up the money and the political will. Medicare, Medicaid, education programs, all of them had to compete with a war machine demanding billions. If Kennedy survives, you potentially get the civil rights legislation and the domestic spending without the war sucking it all away. Kennedy was a politician who could work across the aisle. He had relationships with Southern Democrats that Johnson, for all his skills, couldn't match in the same way. Could Kennedy have prevented the race riots of the mid-60s? Maybe not entirely. The anger was real and justified. But a living JFK, not discredited by a disastrous war, might have maintained more moral authority to guide the country through those turbulent years. The urban decay that plagued American cities for decades afterward might have been addressed earlier and more effectively. Here's something younger folks don't appreciate. After the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev had actually started talking. Really talking. They'd been to the brink of nuclear war, and both men were terrified of going back. In June 1963, just 5 months before Dallas, Kennedy gave his famous peace speech at American University, calling for a new relationship with the Soviet Union. He and Khrushchev negotiated the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that summer, the first arms control agreement of the Cold War. Kennedy was moving toward détente, a easing of tensions, a full decade before Nixon and Kissinger claimed credit for it. If he lives, does the Cold War end sooner? Do we avoid some of the proxy wars in Africa and Latin America that killed millions? Does the arms race slow down, saving hundreds of billions that could have rebuilt American infrastructure? And here's the really controversial bit. Kennedy was a skeptic about the CIA and the military-industrial complex. After the Bay of Pigs, he reportedly said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. Would he have actually reined in the intelligence agencies that ran wild in the 70s and 80s? We'll never know, but it's tantalizing to imagine. Now let's talk about what nobody wanted to discuss in 1963, but everybody knows now. JFK's personal life was a disaster waiting to happen. The affairs, the recklessness, the connections to Marilyn Monroe, who died mysteriously in 1962, and the mafia. In our timeline, Kennedy became a martyr, frozen in time at 46, forever young and glamorous. But if he lives, all of that eventually comes out. Remember, this is before Watergate, before the media regularly investigated presidential misconduct. But it wouldn't have stayed hidden forever. Imagine the Marilyn Monroe connection being exposed not in history books decades later, but in real time during a re-election campaign or second term. Imagine the mob ties, the other women, all of it coming to light. Does JFK get impeached? Does he resign in disgrace like Nixon did a decade later? Here's the darker alternative. Maybe his enemies use this information to control him. Maybe the compromises he has to make to keep his secrets prevent him from being the transformative president we're imagining. Maybe President Kennedy, scandal-plagued and fighting for survival, accomplishes far less than the martyred myth we remember. And let's be honest about something else. Jacqueline Kennedy would have likely divorced him if his behavior continued and became public. The perfect Camelot image that defined their legacy? That disappears. The Kennedy mystique that dominated American politics for generations might have died not with gunshots, but with tabloid headlines. One thing that probably doesn't change much, we still get to the moon. Kennedy had already committed to it in 1961, and the program had momentum. The Apollo 11 landing in 1969 likely still happens, though maybe Kennedy himself is there at mission control to see it, rather than Nixon. But here's what might change in pop culture. The 1960s counterculture that defined your youth might look completely different. The anti-war movement was fueled by Vietnam. Without that war, or with a scaled-back version, does rock and roll take the same trajectory? Do the Beatles still become the Beatles? Does Woodstock happen? The assassinations that followed, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy in 1968, were partly fueled by the violence and chaos that Vietnam created. If JFK lives and Vietnam doesn't spiral, maybe they live too. Maybe the hope of the early 60s doesn't give way to the cynicism and anger that followed. So what if Kennedy had lived? You might have avoided Vietnam, saved 58,000 American lives, and kept the country together through the civil rights era. You might have ended the Cold War a decade early and preserved the optimism that made the early 60s feel like America could do anything. Or you might have watched Kennedy's scandals destroy his presidency and disillusion a generation even more than Vietnam did. You might have seen the civil rights movement progress slower without Johnson's legislative muscle. You might have gotten different problems we can't even imagine. History doesn't happen in a straight line. Change one thing, and 1,000 others shift in ways we can't predict. But one thing's certain, the shots fired in Dallas that day didn't just kill a president. They killed a future. And that future might have been better than we got, or it might have been worse. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.